My grandma's will had a strange condition. I had to spend 30 days alone in her empty house, or I'd lose everything she left behind. Before I tell you how those 30 days changed my life forever, I want to ask you something. What would you do in my place? Would you stay in a creepy old house just for money? Drop your answer in the comments and don't forget to subscribe, because this story is one you will never forget. I remember the day the lawyer read my grandmother's will as vividly as if it happened yesterday. We were all sitting in a small oak-paneled room that smelled faintly of dust, paper, and something metallic, like coins forgotten in a drawer. The atmosphere was tense. My cousins whispered among themselves, their faces pale, their eyes darting around as if they already knew some unpleasant surprise was waiting. My mother sat rigid, her fingers tapping anxiously against her thigh. And me? Well, I was just trying to keep my breathing steady. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began to read. My grandmother had passed away 2 weeks earlier. She was not the warm, affectionate kind of grandmother people like to post about on social media. No cookies fresh from the oven, no bedtime stories. She was difficult. Some would say cruel. Others would call her mysterious or sharp. I called her terrifying. The will seemed fairly ordinary at first. She left jewelry to one cousin, a small amount of money to another, some furniture to an uncle. Everyone listened politely, waiting for the big reveal, the mansion. My grandmother's house was infamous in our family. A large, isolated estate on the edge of town, surrounded by dark woods that seemed to breathe with secrets. Then came my part. The lawyer paused, coughed again, and said, "To my grandchild, insert narrator's name. I leave the family house, but only under one condition. You must spend 30 days and 30 nights inside alone, with no interruptions, no guests, and no leaving the property. If you fail, the house and everything in it will be sold, and the inheritance will be lost." The room fell silent. My cousins stared at me as though I had just been sentenced to death. My mother whispered, "You don't have to do this." But deep inside, I already knew I would. Grandmother's shadow. To understand why I said yes, you need to know who my grandmother really was. She was a woman who believed in control. Not guidance, not support, control. Her voice carried the weight of command, and when she looked at you, it felt like she could pierce through your skin and read the flaws underneath. She had rules for everything: how to sit, how to eat, how to speak. A misplaced fork at dinner could lead to a 10-minute lecture about discipline and disgrace. Growing up, I feared her more than I loved her. She would criticize my clothes, my friends, even the way I laughed. Once, when I was only 9, she told me I'd never amount to anything unless I learned obedience. That sentence burned itself into my memory like a brand. Yet, despite all the harshness, there was something magnetic about her. People in town respected her. Some feared her, yes, but they also admired her intelligence, her wit, her iron will. She built her fortune from almost nothing, running businesses with a ruthless efficiency that made her both wealthy and notorious. I had always been both repelled by and drawn to her. She was like a storm, dangerous but impossible to ignore. So when the lawyer read her condition, part of me thought, of course. Of course she would turn her will into a game, into a test, even from beyond the grave. The decision, everyone expected me to refuse. Who in their right mind would willingly trap themselves in that cold, creaking house for a month? Especially a house filled with memories of a woman who had made my childhood a battlefield. But the truth? I wasn't thinking about the money. I wasn't even thinking about the house. I was thinking about her, about why she would demand such a bizarre thing, about whether there was something she wanted me to find. So, with a voice steadier than I felt, I said, "I'll do it." Gasps filled the room. My mother covered her mouth, whispering, "No," while my cousins exchanged knowing glances, already imagining me failing and them swooping in to claim what would be left. The lawyer nodded solemnly, as if he had expected nothing less. "Then you must move in by the end of the week," he said. 30 days. No exceptions. First steps into the house. A week later, I stood at the gates of my grandmother's estate, suitcase in hand, heart pounding. The iron gates groaned as they opened, and the path leading up to the house seemed longer than ever. Trees leaned over it like silent guardians, their bare branches scratching the gray sky. The house loomed ahead, 3 stories tall with windows like eyes watching me, Curtains drawn tightly as though the building itself had secrets it didn't want me to uncover. The bricks were weathered, the roof tiles dark, and yet there was still something undeniably powerful about it. I stepped inside and the air felt heavy, stale. The faint scent of old perfume mixed with mold and dust. Every floorboard creaked under my weight, echoing through the vast, empty halls. Portraits of ancestors stared down from the walls, their painted eyes following me with silent judgment. I unpacked in the room my grandmother had once occupied. Her presence lingered everywhere, in the heavy velvet curtains, the carved wooden furniture, the faint trace of her perfume still clinging to the sheets. Sleeping there felt like lying inside her shadow, and so my 30 days began, living in the shadow of the past. The first night in that house was unbearable. I could barely close my eyes. Every sound seemed amplified, the pipes moaning in the walls, the distant ticking of an old grandfather clock, the rustle of tree branches scratching against the windows. But worst of all were the footsteps, at least, they sounded like footsteps. Slow, deliberate creaks on the wooden floorboards in the hallway outside my room. Each one seemed closer, then stopped altogether. I held my breath, clutching the blanket like it could protect me. I told myself it was just the house settling, or my imagination playing tricks. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. By morning, the silence felt even heavier. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, but instead of comforting me, it only revealed how dust floated in the air like tiny ghosts. Daily rituals in an empty house. I tried to create a routine. Breakfast in the old kitchen, where copper pans still hung from hooks but hadn't been used in years. Lunch outside on the stone steps where I could breathe fresh air and remind myself that the world beyond still existed. Evenings spent reading in the study, pretending not to notice the chill that always crept in around sundown. But the truth was, the house resisted me. Lights flickered no matter how many times I replaced the bulbs. Doors I was sure I had closed stood ajar hours later. My phone's battery drained twice as fast. And sometimes when I played music, the speakers hissed with static, as if the house itself rejected noise. And yet, every time I thought about leaving, I remembered my grandmother's sharp voice in my head. "You'll never finish anything unless you learn discipline." It was like she had planned this from the start, not just to test my endurance, but to force me to confront her, even after death. Memories of her cruelty. Walking through the hallways was like walking through my own childhood. Every room carried a memory, most of them unpleasant. In the dining room, I could still hear her scolding me for dropping a spoon. In the parlor, I remembered sitting stiffly while she interrogated me about my grades, my friends, my choices. And in the upstairs hallway, there was the spot where, as a child, I had once cried quietly after she called me weak in front of the entire family. She never raised her hand against me, but her words cut deeper than any slap could. She had a way of making you feel small, insignificant, like a soldier who would never be worthy of the battlefield. And yet, there were contradictions. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at me when she thought I wasn't looking, with something almost softer in her eyes. Almost. It was those contradictions that haunted me now. Was this month-long exile meant to punish me? Or to reveal something about her I had never understood? The first clues. On the 5th day, I noticed something strange. While exploring the attic, I found a locked trunk pushed into a corner. It was covered in dust, its metal edges rusted, and it looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. I tried to open it, but the lock wouldn't budge. There was no key in sight. Still, the sight of it sent a shiver down my spine. My grandmother was not the type of woman to keep sentimental trinkets. If she had locked something away, it meant it was important. That night, I dreamed of her. She stood in the hallway, dressed in her favorite black gown, staring at me with those cold eyes. She didn't speak, but her lips moved silently, as if forming a word I couldn't hear. When I woke, I swore I could still smell her perfume lingering in the air. Isolation sets. And by the second week, I began to lose track of time. Days blurred together, each one marked by the same heavy silence. I spoke out loud just to hear a human voice, even if it was my own. I read books I didn't care about, wrote in a journal, and tried to convince myself I wasn't going mad. But the house knew. One evening, I left my journal on the desk in the study. When I came back the next morning, the book was open to a page I hadn't written yet. Scrawled across it in my grandmother's handwriting were the words, "Keep looking." I froze. My chest tightened. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I checked the windows, the doors, everything was locked. No one had been inside, but I knew that handwriting. I had seen it on letters, on the notes she used to leave taped to the refrigerator with orders written like military commands. This wasn't just some prank. This was her. The turning point approaches. From that moment, everything changed. I stopped treating the 30 days as a test of endurance. Instead, it became a hunt. A hunt for answers. Why had she trapped me here? Why leave cryptic messages from beyond the grave? Why that locked trunk in the attic? Each night, I wandered the hallways with a flashlight, searching for hidden compartments, listening for hollow spots in the walls. Sometimes I swore I heard whispers, faint and low, like voices carried through pipes. Sometimes I caught glimpses of shadows that vanished when I turned my head. And sometimes I felt her, standing just behind me, watching. Family reactions. Occasionally, my phone buzzed with messages from my cousins or my mother. "Are you okay?" my mom asked. "You'll never last," one cousin texted, followed by a string of laughing emojis. They all expected me to fail. To run screaming from the house and forfeit the inheritance. But every time I felt like giving up, I remembered that journal page. Keep looking. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It wasn't even about my grandmother's approval. It was about uncovering the truth she had buried. The breaking point. On the 15th night, halfway through my sentence, the house decided to test me in ways I hadn't imagined. I woke to the sound of the piano in the parlor playing by itself. Slow, haunting notes that echoed through the halls. My grandmother's favorite song. I stumbled downstairs, my heart slamming against my ribs. The piano lid was open, the keys moving as though pressed by invisible fingers. I shouted, "Stop!" But the melody continued, unwavering. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. When I turned to leave, I noticed something tucked under the piano bench, an old, yellowed envelope with my name on it. The envelope, my hands trembled as I picked up the envelope. The house responds. That night, something changed in the atmosphere of the house. The air felt lighter, though shadows still lingered in the corners. I fell asleep with the letters beside me, and for the first time, my dreams of her were different. She appeared again, standing in the hallway, but her expression was softer. Not quite a smile, but not the familiar scowl either. She lifted her hand, almost as if to reach for me. And then I woke. On the bedside table, where I hadn't left anything, was another note. Only 2 words this time, written in her unmistakable script: "Find Edward." The countdown: I had 11 days left in the house. 11 days to piece together the truth. But now the question gnawed at me. Who was Edward really? What happened to him? And why had she chosen me to discover this, instead of the grandchildren she praised, the ones who adored her unquestioningly? The house seemed alive with urgency, as if the walls themselves were pushing me closer to an answer. Doors creaked open where they had once resisted. The flickering lights steadied. Even the piano remained silent. It was as if she was guiding me now, and I was determined to follow. The search for Edward. The name echoed in my head like a drumbeat. Edward. Who was he? What happened to him? Why did my grandmother want me to find him after all these years? I began with the letters. They mentioned specific places: an old cafe on the edge of town, the woods near the estate, and a church that had long since been abandoned. I knew I couldn't leave the property, not with the 30-day condition hanging over me, but maybe the house itself held the missing pieces. The library became my base of operations. Dusty ledgers, faded town records, even yellowed newspapers filled the shelves. I dug through them like a detective, my fingers blackened by ink and time, and then, in a stack of newspapers from the 1960s, I found his name a scandal buried. The headline read, "Edward Thompson missing. Local business rival disappears without a trace." My breath caught in my throat. Thompson. The Thompson family had been my grandmother's sworn enemies. They were competitors in business, rivals in reputation. And here was Edward, gone without explanation, swallowed by the past. The article mentioned last sightings near the outskirts of town, close to my grandmother's estate. Police searched but found no leads. The case went cold. I stared at the paper, my heart pounding. My grandmother's love had vanished, and she had kept the secret all her life. But the more I thought about it, the more disturbing questions arose. Had she hidden him? Protected him, or had she done something worse? The house speaks that night, the whispers returned. Louder this time, more insistent. They seemed to seep from the very walls, curling into my ears until I couldn't ignore them. I followed the sound, flashlight in hand, down into the basement. The air grew colder with every step, the stone walls closing in as though the house itself was pushing me deeper. In the far corner of the basement, behind a pile of broken furniture, I noticed something odd, a patch of wall that looked newer than the rest. The bricks were cleaner, the mortar brighter. I pressed my palm against it, and a chill surged through me. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices overlapping until they formed one word. Dig, unearthing the secret. I don't know where I found the courage, but I grabbed a rusted shovel from the corner and began to dig at the base of the wall. Each strike echoed like a gunshot in the silence. Dust and debris filled the air, clinging to my skin, clogging my lungs. After what felt like hours, the shovel hit something solid. Wood. I froze, my chest tightening. With trembling hands, I pulled away the dirt until a small wooden box emerged. It was old, damp, but intact. Inside, wrapped in rotting cloth, were bones. Human bones. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. The box clattered to the ground, its lid swinging open to reveal the unmistakable curve of a skull. Edward, the horror and the truth. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. My grandmother's secret wasn't just a lost love. It was a burial. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My legs were stone, my hands shaking uncontrollably. And then, like a whisper carried on the wind, I heard her voice. You see now. I spun around, and there she was. Or at least, the shadow of her, standing at the edge of the basement, her figure half-formed, her eyes fixed on me with that same piercing gaze I'd known all my life. Tears burned my eyes. Did you kill him? I demanded. My voice cracked in the silence. Her expression didn't change. She didn't speak. But I felt the answer in my bones, as heavy as the box at my feet. No. And yet, the truth was worse. Another letter. Inside the box, tucked beside the bones, was another letter. Unlike the others, this one was written in shaky handwriting, as if rushed. It wasn't my grandmother's, it was Edward's. They found out. They are coming for me. If you find this, know that I never betrayed you. I loved you until the end. Forgive me for leaving you alone. My chest ached. My grandmother hadn't killed him. She had hidden him here, in her house, to protect him from the family war. But he hadn't survived. Whether by sickness, by accident, or by the hands of others, he had died here, alone, buried in the walls of her fortress, and she had lived with that secret her entire life. The emotional climax. I fell to my knees. Clutching the letter, tears streaming down my face. All the cruelty, all the harshness, all the cold discipline, it suddenly made sense. She wasn't just cruel for cruelty's sake. She was broken, hardened by loss, trapped in grief and guilt that she could never confess. Her love had been buried with Edward, and in its place she built walls, not just around her house but around her heart. Walls made of rules, discipline, and iron will, and now through me, she wanted the truth to finally come out. In that moment, I felt her presence surround me. Not the cold, terrifying figure from my childhood, but something softer, sadder. A grandmother who had once loved so fiercely that it destroyed her. The final days. For the remaining days in the house, I kept the letters close. I spoke to her shadow in the hallways, not with fear, but with understanding. I told her I had found Edward, that I knew the truth, that I saw her, not just as the monster of my childhood, but as a woman who had suffered more than any of us knew. The house grew quieter. The footsteps stopped. The whispers faded. And when I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw her stern reflection staring back. I saw myself, stronger, steadier, changed. On the 30th day, as I packed my bags to leave, I found one final note on the pillow. Just 4 words written in that familiar script. Thank you. Be free. The end of 30 days. When the 30th morning finally came, the house was silent. Not heavy, suffocating silence like before. This was different. Peaceful. As if the walls themselves had exhaled after holding their breath for decades. I walked through every room one last time. The parlor where the piano had played by itself. The attic where I found her letters. The basement where Edward's bones had been hidden away. Each space felt lighter, freer, like chains had been broken. For the first time, I didn't feel watched. I didn't feel judged. I felt released. When I opened the front door and stepped into the sunlight, it was as though the house let me go. The family's reaction. My cousins were waiting, their faces twisted with anticipation. They had expected me to fail, to run screaming after a week, maybe 2. But there I stood, 30 days completed, my grandmother's condition fulfilled. "You actually did it," one cousin muttered, eyes wide. "Guess you get the house," another sneered, though their voice shook with disbelief. My mother hugged me so tightly. The reversal I gathered the family in the parlor that evening. They sat impatiently, expecting me to boast or to gloat. Instead, I placed the box of letters on the table and opened it. "These belong to Grandma," I said, my voice steady. "They tell a story none of us ever knew." I read aloud fragments of her letters to Edward, her words filled with a tenderness they had never imagined. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. My cousins shifted uncomfortably, my uncles and aunts exchanged glances, and my mother wiped silent tears from her eyes. Then I showed them the final letter. Edward's letter, the truth of what happened. The bones hidden in the walls. The room erupted in shock. Some refused to believe. Others cried. But no one could deny the handwriting, the evidence, the truth staring them in the face. The real inheritance, I told them, I didn't want the house. Not in the way they thought. This wasn't about money or power or control. My grandmother hadn't left me a mansion. She had left me a story. A truth buried in shadows, waiting to be brought into the light. "I'll restore it," I said quietly. Not as a monument to her cruelty, but as a reminder of who she really was. A woman who loved, who lost, who built walls around herself so none of us could see her pain. That's the legacy I accept. Not the bricks, not the land. The truth. For once, no one argued. The final encounter. That night, before leaving the estate for good, I walked through the house one last time. I paused at the top of the stairs where shadows once loomed darkest and whispered, "I found him." I told them, "You don't have to hide anymore." And then, faint but unmistakable, I heard it. Her voice. Softer than ever, stripped of command, filled instead with gratitude. "You did well." When I turned, the hallway was empty. But in my heart, I knew she was gone. Finally. Reflection. As I left the house behind, I thought about everything I had discovered. My grandmother was not the villain of my childhood, nor the hero some in town believed her to be. She was human. Flawed, broken, complicated. A woman trapped between love and duty, between fear and defiance. She chose me, not because I was her favorite, but because I was the one who questioned her, the one who resisted her control. She knew I'd search deeper. She knew I'd fight to uncover the truth even when it terrified me. And maybe, in her own cruel, twisted way, that was her final act of love. The moral. So here's what I learned. We don't always know the people we think we do, even our own family. Sometimes the harshest, coldest hearts carry the deepest scars. And sometimes what looks like cruelty is really grief in disguise. We can't change the past, but we can choose what to do with the truths it leaves behind. We can bury them, or we can bring them into the light. My grandmother taught me one last lesson, that love, even when hidden, even when broken, never really dies. It lingers, waiting to be seen, to be understood, to be freed. And maybe that's the real inheritance she left me. Closing call. If you've watched until now, I want to hear from you. Do you think my grandmother was cruel? Or just broken? Would you have stayed in that house for 30 days? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story I have for you is even more unbelievable.